but we have a quorum. First item on the agenda is to adopt the agenda. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda from anybody?
Make a motion to adopt it.
Motion has been made to accept the agenda as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion has been seconded. All those in favor of the motion, vote aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed. Motion passes. The agenda is set. We have minutes from our previous meeting, April 30th. Any corrections or changes to those minutes? I read through the minutes. I think they're accurate representation of our actions at the last meeting. I would make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
I'll second it.
Again, motion has been made and seconded to approve the minutes as presented. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Minutes are approved. We have a public hearing regarding a variance request. Jeff and Sue Cadwell are requesting a variance to construct a deck 20 feet from the rear property line and within 5 feet from within the required setback area. This is a property located at 415 3rd Avenue East.
I went over and looked at that property and measured it. The front deck is only 4 feet coming out and certainly wouldn't, I don't believe would cause any problems. And the back is up to a hill with trees all over it, and that's 20 foot, but nobody can hardly see it because of the foliage and the coverage around it. Well, I think it's a pretty simple request.
You know, this is a public hearing, so we will open it up for public comments. And if anybody has anything that they want to comment on, this is the time. Hearing none, we will close the public hearing. And also make note that we received no written or other type of correspondence regarding this request. Yeah, I think you're right, Hal. I think this is a pretty straightforward request. It's to the rear of the house, butts the that rear property line, and it is wooded. Would have minimal impact to the neighbor's property.
I don't think anybody can even see the back of it. I stood up on the hill, I couldn't see it. His wife came out and said, "What's going on? Did you do something wrong?" I said, "No. Can you cut my hair?" So then I got into, she gave me a haircut.
Oh, it looks pretty good. Maybe I should have gone. Nah. Just to state that the one of the requirements of statute for granting a variance is that we have to make certain findings. The first is that the variance is in harmony with the purpose and intent of the ordinance, and the reason for allowing variances in the ordinance is to address issues that might make sense but aren't specifically permitted by the ordinance due to conditions of the property or such. You know, it is a residential home, decks are allowed, and would certainly be in harmony with the area and the purposes that are allowed in that zone district. Two is that the variance is consistent with the comprehensive plan. So this is a residential area. Residential uses exist, you know, throughout the surrounding properties. This is certainly consistent with that. The proposal seeks to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the zoning ordinance. And the deck does seem to be a reasonable use, but it would not be allowed strictly by the required setback. As Hal said, it wouldn't be seen by neighbors and is, something that is not visible by most part to others. 4 is that the plight of the landowner is due to circumstances unique to the property, not created by the landowner. Well, the home was located in this area, this close to the rear property line, not by this owner, but previous owners. And
No, actually, it was by this owner.
that's right, this is the new home. This is the new part of it.
This question's always the toughest one.
I'll make a motion for the approval of it.
A motion has been made. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve the variance as requested. I would just add that number 5, the variance if granted would not alter the essential character of the locality, and that these are all residential homes, uses, and a deck on a home is something that is commonly accepted and doesn't change the character of the area. Is there any further discussion?
I think perhaps a better finding for 4 would talk about the secluded wooded nature and the drainage feature.
There, you've said it. So, thank you.
Sure thing.
Hearing no further comments, all those in favor vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. So Jeff, this goes to the council at our next meeting next week. So, Council will act on it. Next item on the agenda is the discussion on lodging use on the first floor in the downtown zone district, downtown core waterfront district. We had a lengthy conversation a couple months back just about this issue. It was raised by downtown business community interests, and at that time we asked Mike to kind of give us some ideas of what we could do and kind of research some examples of what other communities have done kind of surrounding this issue. So we have some of that information in front of us. I don't know, Mike or Patrick, if you guys want to kind of explain.
We do. We both do, very much, yes. And unfortunate that our other 2 members aren't here right now, so maybe we should explain just a little bit more so they can watch it at home. But at your last meeting, we talked about a plan to go out and gather information about this issue and potentially consider changes based on the outcome of that. This past month, we have been conducting that plan. I'll talk a little bit about some of the research and set the table, and then let Patrick talk about the engagement that he did and the results of that, and then we'll look at some other cities and what they've done, and we'll go from there. So, as just a little more background, this issue was brought to the city. You've had 2 conversations now at the Planning Commission, 1 deciding we would like to talk about it, 2 considering a plan of how you would address it, and now this is your 3rd actual conversation where you're going to look at some actual results. So what is the issue? I think it's pretty crucial that we come to some agreement on that up front, and in the as we did our research for what other cities are doing there, and as we talked to some of the folks here about what their issues were, it's not necessarily just that focused lodging on the first floor, but it's really about some other things too. So we want to just put those on the table and see if people agree that this idea of a critical mass of retail is potentially what the lodging on the first floor was threatening more than anything else, that having a retail shopping district that's a destination retail district is important to the health of the community and that lodging on the first floor could potentially affect that in a negative way. So the next issue being that we're trying to provide a pedestrian-oriented experience, particularly in the downtown waterfront zone. Not that we don't want cars there too, but that all the businesses are really scaled to address pedestrian experience. They're on the sidewalk. They're not very big. And the idea of having a retail zone is that a person can easily get from one retail store to the other. It's all about creating that vibe that is about a pedestrian experience, and that potentially lodging on the first floor can be detrimental to that as well. And then that vibe, again, is about something about vitality, and there were some interesting things we found in other cities where they actually tried to codify the idea of vitality. So we're trying to promote downtown vitality. So in summary, we could say our goals for this project are to encourage a critical mass of retail, to provide a pedestrian-oriented experience, and to promote downtown vitality. If you would agree with that, then we'll use those goals when we talk about what changes you might want to make sure that we're actually accomplishing that. Does that make
I mean, I
sense?
think those are all good goals, and I think that they do hit on the variety of concerns that were raised by the public when that was brought to the Planning Commission.
Well, the downtown people don't want it. That's pure and simple. Jim, do you have a comment that, no?
Well, we'll talk about what
Well, when you're
we
saying-
heard from the
What?
downtown people.
When you-
We'll talk about that next.
But when you're saying downtown people don't want it, what are you saying that they don't want?
They don't want lodging on the first floors. They want to keep it in the retail district.
I think there's a broad sentiment to that, but I don't think that's a universal sentiment. And I think we need to just be, clear about what it is that we're trying to do. And I think this, going in this fashion, helps us get to where we might want to go, rather than just doing an absolute of, we don't want first floor lodging, because I don't, that might be a symptom, but it's not the overall issue that we're trying to raise. I mean, this issue of downtown vitality is, I think, really hits the issue, is that we want an active and vital downtown that is pedestrian oriented, that is functional, and how first floor lodging fits into that needs to be part of that discussion.
May I ask what you mean by your definition of critical mass?
We did some research to try and figure that out, because that was a term that was given to us by some of the downtown retailers that are part of the coalition. And it's a concept that that retail, particularly when it's close together, can kind of feed on itself and multiply the effect that it has. There was some research that was done that tried to actually quantify that. I didn't find it useful enough to include in the packet here. I think it just gets too difficult to say, how would we apply that in a town like we have, in particular such a compact downtown area. And the study was done more about shopping malls, but also larger cities than we're dealing with. But what I mean by it is enough retail that it functions as a district. And how much is that?
Well,
I
that's
guess
what I'm
that's kind of up
thinking.
to us to decide.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, but I think I'm probably leaning more on Hal's side that, okay, none is better than too much.
Yeah.
And I don't know are we talking 40% is okay? Or, I don't know what those numbers are. Critical mass to me is, well, I would say 99% better be retail.
So if we
That's my
don't,
opinion.
if we don't set a goal, a number, and we say we're just going to encourage it, then when faced with the decision on whether we want to add more or not, we probably would just tend to the add more side of the equation. If you had a number, there might be a point where you'd say, oh, we don't want any more retail. And I don't think we're talking about that at all. So the other thing I'd say is use these all together when we're going to talk about lodging on the first floor now in the context of these. The critical mass of retail is only one of the reasons why we might have an issue with it. There were other things that people brought up. So even if we feel like, yep, there's enough retail to be a critical mass, we still might have issues with some of the ways first floor lodging has been executed, and we might want to change some of our rules to deal with that.
Yeah, and I largely believe that retail sector is going to be market driven. I mean, if the market is there, the retail will be there. If the market isn't there, the retail isn't. Now, that's on a kind of a higher level, but there's been one property that's been converted from a retail to a lodging type use in the downtown district, and I'm not sure that should be our overriding consideration in looking at this, but I think that these other suggested goals are ways that we can kind of assure that our downtown area provides the type of area that we want that to be. Whether, I mean, when I've read through the comments and the survey results, yes, people want retail, they want restaurants. I'm assuming we probably would accept and be tolerant of service type uses. I mean, we have a bank downtown, that seems to be, something that fits within that. The other thing is that we have a large number of vacant properties. And how those are being utilized or not utilized, I think is something that, can affect the vitality. And if those change uses, what would that mean? And how do we manage that in a way that ends up kind of moving towards these goals that we are thinking about?
So that talks a little bit about some of the push and pull here, where we even received some comments on it, but that a vacant building isn't doing anybody any good, whereas some activity there might be better for the community. So it's not a universal sentiment from people downtown that lodging is bad on the first floor when the alternative might be vacant building. Then it's not so clear anymore which is the right thing to allow. So that's why they all kind of have to work together. If it was just about vitality, we wouldn't get in the way of the market wanting to use a vacant building in any way. We'd be happier with it being used in some way. But because there's these other things that we're trying to do too, they all have to work together. Well, let's take a look at what people told us, because that was one of our key things we wanted to do, was talk about what our folks are thinking right now about this. So Patrick led that, and I'll let him share it with you. We included in this memo just a little piece of it, but we also sent separately to you all the raw comments that we received. And did we send those in the back of this too? So if people want to talk about any of that, we can, but go ahead, Patrick.
So this is boiling down of the survey results. We had roughly 65 people participate in the survey. So basically, we went through and just categorized their comments and into 40 responses were concerned with critical mass of retail, 17 with character, 8 with parking, 6 with pedestrian concerns, 2 were about the fairness of how property is used, and 2 property value, and 2 accessibility. We asked pretty open-ended questions. What are your concerns, and what do you like about this, in hopes that we'd get a wide variety of answers and different ideas coming out of it. So I'm not really sure what else to talk about unless you have questions.
Maybe just a quick, what we're not trying to do with this. And then also just characterize, who we talked to. You can do that.
Yeah.
But what we're not trying to do with this isn't a vote, it's not a referendum. We're not counting these in a sense to tell you this is what you should do. We're just counting them to organize them. And that's why we showed you all the raw ones too. This was really more about making sure we understand the entirety of the issue as people are experiencing it right now. And up to you as a group to decide which of these are the ones that need to be addressed. So who did we talk to?
So I went on the county's website and figured out all the properties that are in the downtown zone, who owns that property, and made sure to send them a paper copy of the survey, as well as the ability to take it online. So that was 110 different addresses downtown that received a letter with the survey and paper. And then I also went and knocked on every door, and only about 2 people weren't there, one of whom came in and brought in a paper survey. So everyone who owns property or runs a business out of the core downtown waterfront zone was aware, and seems like we got about 50% participation in the survey.
So when we get a response that, 40 of the responses, which is what, two-thirds of the respondents said that critical mass of retail was.
The purpose of the
concern.
planning and zoning is we send out notices to have people that object to certain things that we're doing. And if the downtown retailers don't want it, then why are we considering it? The
Well-
planning and zoning is based on, one neighbor doesn't like something next door, we send out notices, they have the right to come in. And if all the people that have been talking to me come in, the room would be filled.
I wish they had, but thankfully, because we know that not everybody likes meetings, that's why Patrick was kind enough to actually go door to door and give people an opportunity to share their comments with us. And they weren't entirely one way or the other. And of course, you see the comments, you can read them. Critical mass of retail, we're putting words in people's mouth to one extent or another in an attempt to organize information. When they're talking about something that's diminished capacity for commercial uses, for instance, as a comment, we're putting that in the category of well, they're concerned about having enough commercial action going on. And so is it exactly what they were thinking? Maybe not, but it's related to that issue. So you can use this information to, I think, make sure whatever you decide to do is being responsive to the types of issues that people brought up to you. Other than that,
I have a question.
yeah.
So this list, and this was concerns, this was pros.
Mhm.
These are actual comments from people that you received in writing or you talked to? That's where these came from? So it looks to me like there's more.
So
Concern, is that a con or?
So to be clear, this list is my summary of the responses. There was about 65 responses, and some of which were like, full paragraphs or 2 full paragraphs.
Okay.
So those are available if you want them, but this is like a boiling down of what they said. Then we took that further because that was a lot to read and made it into those that chart.
I'm just wondering if I
But it's
can.
not intended to be
That's
a referendum.
Right.
That's why I'm like, does this mean these people are concerned and these concerned in the
Oh,
fact of
Just
Didn't like
these
it,
are your
and these are-
concerns
okay.
about the issue.
Yeah, we
Not
knew.
that I'm against it,
Right.
but I'm just concerned.
These are what I.
Okay.
Yeah.
And why we want to know, not just are you for or against it, we want to know, well, what about it is it that you're thinking of? Because if we're going to make a rule, we want to make sure that it actually addresses what their concern is. And if their concern is, I don't want to look in somebody's bedroom window, that doesn't mean we have to ban them. There's other ways to deal with that. If their concern is there's a loss of retail, well, that doesn't mean that we just focus on lodging now. Maybe we focus on retail instead. So we just want to make sure we understand the issue so that when we try to fix it, we're fixing the right thing. And when we ask people to give us comments, we're using that as a way to understand the issue, not to pick the direction we have to go.
Well, and I think we need to make sure we're clear that, this concept of a critical mass of retail is one issue, and the issue of lodging on the first floor is a whole separate issue, and they might be related, or they might not be related. So I think that's where the conversation needs to go in terms of how we massage this information to get to the real issues. And I mean, nobody has ever said anything about the East Bay or Shoreline Motel or the Cobblestone Cove or Harbor Light or Harbor Inn properties that have been around for years. It's only been as a result of the newest.
I would disagree with that.
Yeah, I think I
Would
would
you?
too.
Yes, I would.
that
I've heard comments about that.
about.
Cobblestone Cove for sure when that was built.
Well, people were objecting to the fact that there was lodging built, but were they objecting to the first floor lodging or just the lodging in general?
Lodging in my opinion,
Yeah, I mean,
lodging in general
see-
in that area.
Yeah, and
Yes.
see, and I think that there's a distinction between this issue of first floor lodging and lodging in general. That's again, another part of this conversation that we need to keep talking about to kind of get to the real heart of what the issue is.
That's a useful segue, I think, to start talking about how other cities have approached this type of issue. So first of all, there's tens of thousands of cities in the United States. And even though I tried to narrow down to small cities that had a central retail district and that had tourism as one of their main, or something that they advertised anyway, something that they relied upon for some significant amount of their economy, there's still thousands and thousands of those. We looked at a few dozen. So there's a lot more out there that you could find. I think it's important to note most of the cities that we looked at don't have regulations that address this issue at all. It's
I just want to make a comment about the reason we were picked as the coolest city was one of them was because of the Crooked Spoon, the small shops, the donut shop, and the uniqueness of that downtown core area. And I think if you're considering fooling around with that, you're going to have a lot of people that are going to be very angry about it, paying taxes here.
Well, at this point, I don't think we're saying we're doing anything other than to evaluate the concerns that were raised and trying to figure out if there's something that needs to be done with the ordinance to kind of address those concerns or deal with issues that might have been identified through this survey. That's my take on what we're trying to do here. We don't have a specific agenda to take a particular action at this point.
No, although we're going to get to a suggestion just as a conversation starter on the next step. So here's what I thought were ideas that are worth talking about. Not necessarily we should do that, but just to understand how some other cities have addressed issues like this. So this nice small town in Illinois, and small town, some of these are pretty big. Most of them are bigger than us. They define the use that they call guest accommodations, and that includes small-scale lodging facilities. So what we have downtown that's 10 units or less, they would categorize as something called a guest accommodation. In the city, all guest accommodations are required to get a special use permit they're also required to get a license. That's how they control where they're placed, how they affect the neighborhood, all those sorts of things. Now, that is just as related to our previous conversation about vacation rentals in town as it is about this downtown issue, but it's another tool that could be used to put some controls in place on how these things affect, how first floor lodging affects the downtown, that they limit their total number of licenses to 20. Now, this group has talked about licensing and not been interested in going down that path, and so it's not something that we would recommend, but it's an idea to think about. Moving on to Texas, lodging is a conditional use in all of their commercial zones. And so any lodging uses require that extra level of review, neighborhood review, consideration of how it fits in to the neighborhood, what it does to the character, plus a full development plan that you're looking at. In Aspen, they have this idea of zoning by floor. So in basement and main floors, they don't allow lodging unless the entire building is dedicated to lodging. So I don't know if that quite solves our issue, but just the idea that we could talk about uses differently on different floors. We do that for some uses now, and it would be perfectly all right to say something different about lodging. Sedona, everybody likes Sedona, I think, so they don't really have a downtown shopping district that's quite like what we've got going on. They certainly don't have the pedestrian experience like we do. But they control lodging by zoning. If it's not zoned lodging, you can't do lodging, and nothing is zoned lodging except for existing properties there is lodging on. So if you want to do a lodging development, you have to request a rezoning first. So it's, again, adding that extra step of approval in before a project was granted to make sure that it's going to fit in the way we want it to. Park City has an interesting idea about this storefront area, and they define it as, well, it's kind of complicated the way they define it, but it's basically some separate or enclosed space that touches on that storefront. It's either got a window or an entrance, and it's within a certain distance of an abutting public street. Basically, any building downtown would have a storefront space by this definition. And lodging rooms are prohibited in the storefront area. And now Excelsior kind of does that same idea, but rather than prohibiting lodging, they actually talk about Water Street, which is their pedestrian-oriented shopping district. They have a short list of things that you can do there. Lodging isn't on it, and they're all designed around this idea of making it a critical mass of retail to ensure that it stays a destination for shopping. So they have a list of things you can do, but then they also say services are allowed, but they have to, first of all, be approved by the Planning Commission and the City Council. They must be a charter city to get away with stuff like that. And they also have this list of things they have to accomplish, which I think is a good thing for us to think about. Okay, well, of course we want banks downtown, but why is a bank different than some other office? Because it has substantial walk-in traffic. It encourages retail traffic. It's open retail hours. It's typical use that you might see in a shopping district. And then they also talk about artists and handcraft space, and we've had some conversation about, well, we want people to be able to make things downtown too and sell them, and that can be a part of a vital retail area, is that making space, as long as it's also doing some selling. So they covered that. And so Telluride, the last example we brought in for you, is kind of an outlier, and it gets to that idea of vibrancy again. They actually have a definition of vibrant commercial storefronts, and if you're not doing it, if you're not a vibrant commercial storefront, then they have some
Can't get a liquor permit.
concern. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, well, there you go.
yeah, I mean, obviously that doesn't apply to us very much. I'm not sure what their little liquor permits were that they were talking about. This it was different than what we're allowed to do in Minnesota. But then they also reserve the right to use the space in front of the store for art or educational displays, which I think is kind of a interesting. That fits with us better, although we already have the right to do that since it's public space in front of the stores. But just this idea that it's not just about lodging, it's about vibrancy, and the theater building being vacant for 40 years was just as difficult on critical mass of retail as changing one retail store into a lodging facility is maybe more impactful than that. A vacant storefront is potentially more impactful in a negative way than having it be used for something else. And so maybe we don't only want to address the use of lodging, but maybe we also want to think about, are there other things we need to do to help ensure this vibrancy? And then there's various performance standards that we could adopt. Rather than changing what we allow for uses, we could just say, no rooms with windows can be on the first floor that are lodging or in the storefront area, or they have to be, no curtains are allowed on the windows or something like that. So, yeah, you want to have a bedroom there, knock yourself out, but you can't ever cover the window. Or that they have to be set back at least 20 feet from the street or something like that. Or look at where we have existing first floor lodging. That doesn't seem to be objectionable, like the Harbor Inn, and decide what is it about that makes it okay for us? What characteristics does it have that seem to make it compatible with the pedestrian experience, that seem to make it compatible with the retail experience, and then codify those performance standards. So did anybody have any questions on that?
I don't have any questions. I think it starts to, kind of gather these kind of different concepts and starts to bring them together into something that's more central and something that maybe we can start to deal with. I understand where the concerns, come from, and this interest in preserving what's called the critical retail base, but I think that's kind of a misnomer in the sense that I don't think it's just retail. I think it's, this issue of vibrancy of the downtown is really much more at the heart of it all, and has to do with restaurants and entertainment and all the things that go into, I think, what I would envision to be a vibrant downtown. I think just a retail downtown doesn't necessarily create that level of vibrancy. I think that there's more needed to create that, because sidewalk cafes might be a thing that could create vibrancy. It's this interaction between people and the surroundings that I think is, to me, what kind of hits at the heart of all of this. And
Except now, if you have more lodging facilities in this little tiny downtown area, it will affect the feel, the vitality of people visiting, of us that live here, that walk up and down the street. I think that will have a big impact on the feeling of vitality of your downtown.
see, and I don't know I don't know necessarily feel that same way, because if there were new lodging facilities built in the West End or somewhere outside of the downtown area, and those people all still came to downtown Grand Marais, it's going to add more people to the downtown experience.
I'm not saying about people walking, I'm saying people in hotels on what I call Main Street. That makes a difference to the feel. I've been in towns, I've been to some of these towns, I've been to other towns. It changes the feel when you're walking down a street, and one shop you're looking in the window, oh, that's kind of cool, maybe I should go in, but you walk on, and then next thing you know, you're looking in, oh, somebody just got out of the shower and they have a towel wrapped around them.
Well,
So
I think that's
a big
certainly
concern.
that's certainly an issue, but I don't know that is looking at somebody, through the window is. I think that's the issue. It's not that there's a lodging property there. That doesn't.
It
change.
changes the feel of what this town is. Yes, it does. I believe it does. It changes the feeling of Grand Marais the history of Grand Marais is important. And it has always been lots of little shops along Main Street, and they have changed over the years. We can all name, this building used to be this, and it used to be that, but lodging facilities, new lodging facilities down on Main Street, I don't think fit in.
We'll wait, we'll get to you, Jim. Well, I mean, I understand certainly that perspective. You know, I mean, as a downtown property owner, I certainly know how the downtown works as a kind of a retail and restaurant core to the community. You know, I don't necessarily, I don't feel that threat that a lodging facility changes the character of the downtown. I mean, if somebody went in and bought the Lang lot and put in a 5-unit lodging property in there, would that change the downtown? I don't think so. I think it would change it for the better. You know, I mean, I think you'd add a property that's, you know, active and contributing to the community, bringing people in. And I think that could be done in a way that, you know, rooms aren't going to necessarily face the street. I mean, I think that's some of the things that we might be talking about, is that if they could be done in a way that, you know, didn't create that kind of interaction between somebody stepping out of the shower and people standing on the street. You know, I don't think we want that. I mean, yeah.
If they don't draw the drapes, it could be a problem.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Well, anyway, are we
Yeah,
going to
so
be here
what do
all
we
night
do now?
about this?
What do we do now?
We're gonna be
Yes.
doing this, yes.
All night.
So let Mike go on, because he has some recommendations here.
Well, and these recommendations are based on, you know, earlier experiences with policy conversations about the sort of regulations we're interested or willing to pallet, and the things that we pull out of those lists that I think address what the issues that people told us are. So the idea that, well, what if all lodging on the first floor wasn't just allowed but was a conditional use instead? That would allow you to look on a case-by-case basis, and if somebody wanted to take the Lang property and turn it into a lodging establishment rather than a gravel lot, we could decide as a community, yeah, that is a win, that's a big improvement, but you still have the ability to talk to them about how the building they're designing affects the pedestrian experience, rather than they can just go and do it. So it's not a prohibition, it's just a way of us making sure that when a lodging facility is put in this zone, that it is compatible with the neighborhood, that it doesn't create some of these other issues. Taking that a step further, I really like the idea of defining the storefront area and requiring in some way a pedestrian-oriented use there. Potentially, this could be compatible with lodging too, if there was a small lodging facility, but they had a lobby where they sold some things, and that's what was on the storefront. That would be compatible with the pedestrian experience in a way that the bedroom window is clearly not. But it also helps us deal with, can we leverage this demand for more lodging in a way that also adds to the vitality by adding more retailer shopping or other things that get people to want to be here and just create more of that energy and more of that vibe. So if we said, yeah, you can have 10 units of lodging in that building, you're going to have to reserve this 800 square feet of storefront to do retail experience stuff. And then it's kind of a win-win. We get more of what we want by leveraging this demand that we're concerned about right now. And then the last is, think about that vitality requirement. This is not unprecedented for us. We did this with our liquor licenses for quite some time. When we were limited to 4 full liquor licenses, we added a provision that, well, you have to stay open 11 months of the year, otherwise we're not going to give you one of them. Mm-hmm. And that's a vitality ordinance. You know, it was probably more about people want to be able to go to the bar all year, but it's a vitality issue. And is there other things that we might think about doing particularly downtown, to avoid the carpet roll-up syndrome in the wintertime around here, or to take advantage of it in some way that suits our needs. So that recommendation is for discussion. It's not like, let's do this for sure. And I don't know how you want to proceed. If you want us to take that and write it up into something that looks a little more like an ordinance and something that you could discuss or maybe pass around and do some more engagement with.
I like your recommendations. I would like to see all lodging in the downtown district a conditional use. I'm not saying no, I like the idea of that we figure out a way to have maybe on the second level, but I would just feel more comfortable that any lodging has to be a conditional use and be approved, and we look at the plan in that area.
I mean,
That's my opinion.
That's certainly an option for us, I would be, I'm probably not as willing to be that restrictive at this, right off the bat. I mean, certainly we could decide how we want to, proceed with this and hold a public hearing and gather, I mean, I think this has to be a broader community discussion, before the planning commission, but we have to set the tone, we have to,
Right.
we have to propose something.
And that's what of these I like these ideas, and I just want to offer my opinion on the
Well,
first one.
and sometimes when you take a more restrictive approach, then it certainly generates a higher level of concern, and, we might be
We'll
able
get
to.
more people here.
We might be able to, yes, turn out more, so.
If you do want more feedback, we're going to come up with a creative list of ways to do that are not a public hearing.
Well, but we are responsible for holding a public hearing, but, yeah, the idea of gathering public comments, and I think that, yes, if we can be creative about that, it's to our benefit to understand what the community, what their ideas and thoughts are on.
And we may ask you for your participation in that as well, so fair warning.
I love participating.
Before we go on any further, Jim, I'm just going to give you a chance to add anything that you might, since we've kind of gone through the report from Mike and Patrick.
Well, the first
Could you
thing I
come?
would-
Could you come?
the first comment I
You can
would-
identify yourself too for the those.
I'm Jim Boyd. I run the Chamber of Commerce, and I help bring this issue to the Planning Commission. The first issue I would raise, it has nothing to do with this really. It's the way to bring this up, we had to come to the Planning Commission, and there's no way to bring it to you. We had to talk to you during your public comment section at the beginning of your meeting. There was no formal way to approach the Planning Commission and through it, the City Council, and say, we have an issue here, here's what we'd like to see happen. That's never happened. It's been a ad hoc kind of thing from the get-go. And I think that for the future, you should think about some way of having a formal procedure by which residents and businesses can approach someone, the Planning Commission maybe, or someone, and say, we want to bring this issue forward. So it kind of didn't happen in a way that I think it should have. You're redefining the issue more broadly than what the businesses did. They were concerned about lodging on the street level in small development. I don't think anyone had an objection to a development, say, on the Lang lot that's more than 10 units, or any objection to the existing downtown lodging that's on the street level, say East Bay Suites or Shoreline or whatever. That wasn't the intent. I think the intent had a lot to do with rents. The feeling that with the conversion of Stephen Hoagland's jewelry store into what has become a very beautiful project, no question about that. that the rents that are available to people who convert are much higher than the rents available for retail or dining space, and that over time, if this kind of conversion is allowed downtown, the retail and dining experience, that is the essence of being downtown, will be priced out of the market here. I think that's especially true when you've got families controlling some of the downtown land who seem impervious to the market. It's not market driven. It's family prerogative. I really like some of the things that Mike has suggested. The storefront area, for example, I think might have. Let me back up. Obviously, the people who own the land downtown have a lot of rights wrapped up in that ownership, but the town creates the conditions under which those businesses survive and thrive. So the town itself has some interest too, and I think that the storefront area thing or something like that, for example, might have prevented the Harbor Inn folks from converting what was a restaurant into basically a blank wall, another rooming area on the street that that made a dead block out of something that wasn't before then. And I think that you should have had the ability to have some say on what they did with that, and you didn't. So adding this kind of condition, I think, would be in the city's interest, and that you have the right to do that. That no business makes it totally on its own. It uses your streets and your water and your sewer and the things that all the residents of the city are putting into it. The vitality requirement, I think, if you can craft it in the right way, would be a terrific addition to what is in the best long-term interests of the city of Grand Marais and the people who live here. So, again, I think that it was a narrower issue that was brought to you, and it was the concern that, and by the way, am I right that the folks who did such a bang-up job with the Mayhew are going to reconvert the street level to some sort of retail operation? I've heard that will be true, and that would be a good.
I'm not aware of that. But.
Okay, I'd heard that was something that they were considering. So, yeah. So I like these suggestions. They speak to a broader issue, and it's your right to redefine the issue any way you want. I think the people who brought it to you were most concerned about not encouraging continued what seemed to be a potentially developing trend of converting existing retail and existing dining, not empty blocks, existing into street level lodging that could just price any other use out of the market.
Well, thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. I mean, yeah, and I think you are right in terms of approaching the planning commission. Sometimes it is a kind of cumbersome process to figure out how to bring an issue before the planning commission and not turn it into kind of a spectacle. But I think the planning commission did appreciate, though, the comments that were presented, and that even though you suggest that it was just an issue of conversion of these existing properties to this lodging, small-scale lodging, I think the planning commission kind of caught a thread that there was something more there too, and that, I think, is why we've kind of expanded this conversation to look at this issue of vitality and what this core downtown commercial district really means to the community, and how we address not just the concerns that were raised by you and your group of people, but the concerns that the planning commission has about the downtown too. So.
And that's to your credit if you can meet their concerns and go beyond it, and by defining the broader underlying concern.
Well,
Terrific.
I guess we'll see. So, next steps?
A month ago, what we said was, we'll come back with engagement results, a look at what other cities do, and some recommendations. We also said, the next steps after that are, if you're ready, we'll put some draft regulations together and put that on your next agenda for you to consider. Not necessarily schedule a public hearing in a month, but bring some drafts for you to look at that are really more specific and see how they fit into our regulations. And so we can do that. And we can also bring to you next month our suggestions on how we might shop that around the community for more engagement as well.
So are there ways to take, Stacy's suggestion about just not allowing lodging unless it's conditional use permit in the downtown district, and kind of offering an alternative to that with some other type or forms of allowing lodging, but with certain restrictions or limitations that give at least a spectrum of possibilities. So we don't have.
I noticed in here, some of these people require conditional use permits,
Right.
which gives the planning commission an authority to either approve or reject something that might be controversial, like your four things. Does it affect the surrounding of the current neighborhood, or now you're talking about core downtown? That way, then, if you're gonna start leaning towards lodging downtown, you're gonna create some problems, in my opinion.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm leaning towards lodging. I just,
Well, it sounds like it to me.
I want to be clear, though, that I'm not opposed to lodging just in the downtown as just a flat-out concept. I mean, I think lodging could be incorporated in the downtown area in certain instances and in certain fashions, but
Well, the simple way to do it would be require a conditional use permit
well,
without doing all this.
Well,
Is this gonna be controversial? I can tell you right now. I've been through these. I've been around here a long time, and I remember when the Dollar General, nobody's gonna pay any attention to it. What happened?
Might be important to just
I
remind
just,
folks.
I just don't wanna see controversy right now. The town is moving ahead. We've got housing, we've got workforce housing, the EDA is doing things, the county's doing bonding, we're getting things together. And to me, this just invites some controversy.
well, I think,
it invites
And
discussion.
we don't need it right now.
but I think we
We got
can,
63% of this city is tax exempt. You realize that?
I do.
Yeah, I've got it, you've seen it, I gave
have.
it to you.
I mean, I think we need to put a more positive spin on this, though, Hal. I think that by looking at the downtown and looking at this concept of vitality of the downtown, I think what we're trying to say is we want this downtown to be a healthy environment that attracts locals and visitors and is the kind of place that people want to visit.
And I don't agree with that, but the simple way to do that would be to require a conditional use permit, because every situation is different.
I think maybe,
You want a tattoo parlor right in here?
sure, I think that'd be fun.
Okay.
But I want to remind people, lodging is allowed right now. Our ordinances allow it. They allow it on the first floor. They even say lodging on the first floor. That's what's allowed. So
Right.
we're not talking about changing things to make lodging allowed. It is allowed.
But I think Hal and I are on the same page.
So
We
what?
should change that part.
So what we're talking about is having a thoughtful community conversation about whether we still like that and whether we might want to change it. That's not controversy in my mind.
No.
That's just a thoughtful community conversation. And we can have discussions about issues that are tough and that are difficult to figure out what's the right thing to do and not call it controversy. It's just
Right.
process. It's what we do. It's what your job is here. And I don't think it's going to be controversial. I think it's going to be, there'll be disagreement and it won't be obvious what we have to do, but it's okay. It's good.
Well,
and so
and-
far, it's been terrific.
and
the kind of
conversation-
response.
I'm not an obstructionist, I'm just pointing out my viewpoints. And the way I would see it is that if you require a conditional use, you would have control over the issue.
But I do think we need to come up with some more guidelines and just so that we're not just going to vote no. Because Tim's right. It might work in some instances.
Right.
Well, but
Well, I'm not opposed to
yeah,
that.
so that's what we need to
Yeah.
come up with some ideas.
And
of
carrying on the
where
conversation,
we could, right.
it helps you talk about what conditions you might establish too, to give people guidance so that they don't, there's not just a complete chilling effect on the idea of people developing downtown, that they know this is what we want. Okay, well, we can do that, sure.
So, just thought came to my head. Oh, it's right. I'm on TV. Should I say this? I don't know.
Well,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So I'm wondering, because Hal and I are concerned about what's happening, do we request that we have a moratorium on any more lodging facilities until we've had a chance to look at this?
That issue was brought up, actually.
Okay.
At the beginning of this conversation, this group thought no, and the council, but did ask the council to consider it. And the
this
council
group-
said,
This group, on a 2-to-1 vote, decided, referred the recommendation to adopt a moratorium to the
Yeah.
council.
they
And they
had said,
voted.
And the
Okay.
council,
They're not-
council
we're not
said,
interested.
no. It's-
Okay.
So,
All right, now I'm caught up. Thank
so
you.
Yeah.
so there- but the issue is still there and it's significant, and, you know, we need to figure out how we come to some kind of common position on what it is that we want this downtown to be in the future, and, you know,
And I think we can. I think you can come up with some
I'm
ideas
not
for us.
opposed to that, but sometimes these things get out of control. That's what concerns me. I've been around here a long time, I've seen these ideas pop up, and all of a sudden, then they go the other way. And I just don't want to see a lot of controversy. We've got things going in this town right now, are going good. Housing, the big issue. Marais Somnus of the EDA has put new blood and life into the EDA, and we got things going. And Jim has done a great job with the chamber. We've got things together now. I want them to stay that way. All the years I've been here, we tried to put a marina in here, been nothing but, oh, we lived through all our life, we don't want to change anything, don't do anything. We want to go back to 1940.
change is hard.
I hear it all the time. And it won't work.
So,
That's the end of my speeches.
okay.
thank you, Hal.
I'm ready to make a motion for adjournment.
We're not ready yet.
Well, yeah, we want to make sure
we know
he's
we're
clear
gonna
what
be
he's going to
doing.
do
Well,
next.
I've got a pretty clear idea, but I want to just maybe correct how I described it earlier to adjust to what we talked about more recently. Rather than it being absolutely like a draft ordinance, perhaps it'll be more of a matrix of here's options for what level of review it's going to take, and here's options for what storefront means, and something like that, where we just add some more depth and meat on the bone to what we're talking about here in a way that we can go and have a conversation with people about.
I think that's a good
I
idea.
think that would be beneficial, and I think if we had our other two commission members here too, I think they're going to weigh in on those thoughts or concepts, you know, in a probably a constructive way too, so that would help us move this discussion, you know, to the next step.
Right.
So,
All right.
if that's something that you think you'd be ready for next month,
Yeah, and a plan for continued engagement
Yeah.
with that.
all right. Any other comments, thoughts?
Oh, I'm
You said
okay
you're
with
done. Meeting is
Motions?
adjourned. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
So you're going to do this a little bit longer.
So, downtown vitality,
Yeah.
interesting.